Greetings and welcome. We are in Senior English 8, and our ambitions now this hour is to work with the great Alexander Pope, P-O-P-E. You should have your hymnal open to 630, 631. We'll be looking at Alexander Pope, and if we have time, I hope we do, we'll also make some references to the text Elegy on page 666, all right? The great poem Elegy on 666. That's my hope. Let's begin, first of all, by talking about Alexander Pope as a writer of the scientific enlightenment. There are two names which stand central to appreciation of the age of science and the age of reason. One, Jonathan Swift. Two, Alexander Pope. They are the giants of this age. Pope is known for his brief, witty, sarcastic, Juvenalian satire. Remember, we made that distinction between Horatian satire, soft, gentle. Juvenalian satire, named after the great Juvenal, the great Roman writer, who was a nasty, nasty skeptic and cynic. He will write nasty satire. Pope also the same. Pope will write these little lines that raise all kinds of questions about people's integrity or whatever. I mean, when he came after you to jack you in language, he could do a fine job of it. Pope, however, didn't just do that. He was a brilliant scholar. He translated out of the Greek the great classics of Homer. So he was beloved for his ability to translate and to provide the English people with new translations of Homer. Maybe one of his most famous set of lines is Essay on Man. And it speaks directly to this age of science, this age of the Enlightenment, as we will often refer to it. All right, this age of science, this age of the Enlightenment. Okay? Now, what is the age of science? I'm on my whiteboard. You'll want to write this down. The age of science can only be understood if you compare it. Can I do this right here real quickly? This is the age of science or the age of reason. Over here is what we will call pre-science or the age of pre-reason. That is to say the Renaissance and those times which come before, right? Before, you have what we will call three value domains of arts, morals, and science. Arts, you're pretty familiar with what that means, right? The stuff you see, etc., entertainment. Morals, you know what that word means, the stuff you're supposed to do or not do. And science, you know what that means, right? In terms of trying to deduce and understand the world, okay? Before the age of reason, and by the way, 1700 can be a nice working date for you. It's a round date, but it works nicely, okay? So pre-1700, we're talking this pre-enlightenment, okay? It's sometimes even said that, we talk about it that way, pre-enlightenment. These arts, morals, and science, are you ready for my whiteboard? These arts, morals, and science all stayed within the same basic value sphere. And guess who had all of the control over those things? Namely, the church, the Roman Catholic Church. So, for example, if right now you get on a plane, you fly to Rome, you go to the Vatican and you take a look at one of the most remarkable rooms in all of the world called the Sistine Chapel, and you walk into that thing, like I've taken students to, and you ask them to just look up, they literally almost fall over. They cannot believe, in fact, some of them will do this to try and touch it. They cannot believe how remarkably clear the artwork is on the ceiling. Way, way up in the air. I mean, it's way up in the air, and you want to touch it because you feel like it's literally right above you. Why? Because Michelangelo painted that stuff. How did he do it? Laying down painting. He spent so many thousands of hours doing this, but all of that work was done for the church. Art, all for the church. Morals, the church told you how to behave. Science, also the church. Everything dominated by the church. We will define this age of reason as the differentiation. To differentiate means what? To break apart. To break apart. That's what that word means. Break apart. Okay? These three value spheres. So that now, in the 17th century, it began to look like this. Arts, morals, and science. Got me? Okay? It began to break apart. Got me? So, you started to have art that had its own domain. Think, for example, here of Shakespeare, right? he will in fact sometimes call into question the power of the church. Who marries Romeo and Juliet? See? Who marries Romeo and Juliet? Right? Romeo goes to his confessor, Father Friar Lawrence. Friar Lawrence is the one who does it. What happens to R&J? See? They get jacked at the end of that play. Who's responsible for their marriage? See how this works? Shakespeare seems to be calling into question the power of the church. Probably wasn't the wisest thing for that Friar Lawrence to do. See what we're seeing? Right? Yep. In terms of morals, the church retains its power here. Right? The church retains its power in terms of morals. But in terms of science, and are you watching my whiteboard? That's why we call it the age of science or the age of reason. Science begins to differentiate itself from the other two, extract itself from the other two. And for the first time in Europe, we begin to see real serious questions that are what we are going to call scientific in nature. Namely, the scientific method is invented during this time. How does that one work? Well, you already know it. It's a three-part dance, the scientific method. One, you start with some notion of an idea or a concept, what we'll call a hypothesis. Two, you collect some data to either prove or disprove that hypothesis. Three, you have to have some generalizations of the findings. Did the findings prove the hypothesis or disprove the hypothesis? Do you got me? So in the age of science, it becomes an age of reason, an age of inquiry using the scientific method. Got me? Now that changes the way Europeans look at their world. Radically changes the way Europeans look at their world. Alexander Pope comes along and he asks a really intriguing question. When we're living in 1700, how has the world changed and how have humans changed? And he writes this little poem called Essay on Man. Don't be confused. It's not an essay, it's a poem. It's a poetic essay where he says some really interesting things about human beings. I'll outline it and then we'll read it. One, he says humans are really now confused. It would make some sense if you look at my whiteboard. It's a lot simpler if the church just tells you everything. Right? Especially in these three areas. If the church just gives you all the answers, that's a lot simpler. When you start breaking these value spheres apart, there starts to become friction. So for example, I'll give you a classic example. Galileo will say to the church fathers, dude, just look through the telescope. No. Dude, will you just look through the telescope? No. We already know. No. He's like, you're not going to look through a telescope. Well, what did they believe? They believed that the earth was the center of the universe. Everything rotated around the earth. No. Just look through the telescope, dude. That's all I'm asking of you. And the church says, no, we won't do it. And if you don't recant what you're saying, toast on a post. Galileo says, all right, fine, I recant. But he said to a whispered on his way out the door, I'm still right. And guess what? He was right. But here's the problem. When you begin to challenge some of the fundamental teachings of the church and the Bible, now you got issues, right? So the first thing Pope will point out is humans are more confused now than we've ever been. Lost, confused, unclear. Number two, we're also more skeptical. Whereas before, if the church said it, you totally trusted it and you did it. Not anymore. Not anymore. Now, starting to look like a little bit more like we're not so sure about this, how much we can trust of the church. With that in mind, read this. I'm on page 631. Know then thyself. These are very, very famous words. Know then thyself. Are you reading it with me? 631. Know then thyself. Presume not God to scan. The proper study of mankind is man. In other words, don't worry about theology. Don't worry about religion. Don't worry about studying the church. You want to study anything? Study human beings because we are one jacked up species. Why jacked up? Take a look. Placed on this isthmus of a middle state, a being darkly wise and rudely great, with too much knowledge for the skeptic's side, with too much weakness for the stoic's pride, he hangs between. For your notes, humans seem to be kind of stuck in the middle. On the one hand, complete confidence in what we know. On the other hand, not so much. It's the difference between a high school senior and a high school freshman at Wallen High School. Freshmen think they know everything. By the time senior, you get to be a senior, you kind of start to go, yeah, there's a whole lot I'm starting to see I just don't get so much. Like, for example, what's going on with my freshman stuff. Remember when you're a freshman, it didn't matter to you. Now that you're a senior, yeah. See, they're asking you questions now, like what happens after you graduate, stuff like that. It matters differently. The more you know, the less you seem to understand. That's what he's saying. And seniors go, I totally get this. The more you know, the less you seem to kind of fully understand. Or the less confident you are that you can know everything, right? That's the only problem with knowing that you know, that realizing there's a lot more to know. Seniors will often say, I know more than I knew when I was a freshman, but I'm aware there's a whole lot more I got to know that I never thought about when I was a freshman. Like, dude, I always just thought I walked into a kitchen, opened a refrigerator, and there's the food. Yeah, not when you leave home, because somebody's got to buy that stuff and put it in that fridge. And that's called a job. Now, where are you going to get yours for the next 40 years? And see, and am I even saying that to some of you right now? Made your little stomachs go clunk. Why? Because, crap, it was a lot nicer when I was a freshman. Because then when I was a freshman, I didn't have to worry about that. Now I'm about 300 days away from being on my own. Now what? See how that works? That's what he's saying. Keep reading, right? He hangs between in doubt to act or rest, in doubt to deem himself a god or beast, in doubt his mind or body to prefer. Which is more important, your body or your mind? See? Which one? See how this works? Born but to die, and reasoning but to err. Alike in ignorance, his reason such, whether he thinks too little or too much. And for those of you that say, dude, this sounds so much like Hamlet's To Be or Not to Be, you're dead on right. Because Hamlet's To Be or Not to Be, roughly 100 years earlier, right? 1600. We're now talking 1700. Hamlet is the poster boy for the 18th century person, right? For this 1700 person. In other words, dude, what do I do? Like, where do I go? So I've had seniors who will say to me, there's too many options. There's too many things to do. Just go to college. Yeah, but go to college to do what? They're like, what am I going to study? What am I going to be when I grow up? There's like 1,000 cajillion things I can do. Why doesn't somebody just tell me? See, here we are. Watch this. Why doesn't somebody just tell me what to do? Nah, it doesn't work that way. You got to choose. Well, yeah, choose to do what? I don't know. Like, how am I supposed to know what I'm going to do? This is that feeling of, on the one hand, excitement. I'm so excited to be graduated. I'm done. I'm getting out of here. On the other hand, fear. What if I choose wrong? Like, what if I don't know how to choose? What if I choose something and I think it's all right, and then I come find out that's not what I want to do? I'm not going to end up like one of those 40-year-olds that I loathe to look at and like, my life sucks. I'm not going to be one of those guys. And how will I make it? And how will I feed myself? See how that works? And once, some of you have said this out loud, once you start thinking about it, there's no way to stop this crap. It's a whole lot easier to try and pretend. It's like a student once said to me, the reason I stone is not because I like dope. The reason I stone is I don't want to think. What don't you want to think about? Right. What's got to come? Of course, the only problem with stoning is sooner or later, guess what? You still got to think some more. See how that works? In other words, these decisions that get made, they don't go away just because you do. Those decisions still have to come. They're still waiting. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. See how that works? And just a few seconds ago, I was counting us down towards graduation day in May. Correct? That's his point here. Notice, chaos of thought and passion. And there it is. Sounds like I've had seniors that say, wow, we're finally reading something that sounds just like what it's like to be a senior. Look at the next two words. All confused. I had a senior that once said, when I was a freshman, I dreamed about this day. I dreamed about this moment. When some teacher would tell me I was 30 school days away from being done with the first semester of my senior year. I dreamed about this moment. Now that I'm here, I'm like, what do I do? All confused. Dude, you've been in high school for 3.5 years. You're telling me you don't have any idea? No, I'm more confused now than I ever have been in my life. How is that possible? This is called the 12th grade, which means 12 years of school. That's why they call it 12th grade. That means you've been in school for 12 stinking years. And you're telling me now you're here? You got no clue what you're doing? You're confused? Pope says, yeah, that's called the human condition. The more you know, the less you know. Isn't that funny? The more you know, the less you know. Which is, of course, kind of funny because kids, they don't need to know anything other than when's recess. Some of us say, I'd like to go back to that. Of course, you can't go back to that. Created have to rise or have to fall. Great Lord of all things, yet a prey to all. Put a note to yourself. This is the age of technology and the rise of technology. But of course, very quickly, the Matrix films are going to be made just a few days later, right? And you grew up watching some of those films that ask the simple question, like Terminator films. Did we get so smart and we made such great computers that they were the end of us? So that now, for example, Stanford will tell us that if on this planet, a tenth of a second, you could shut down every single computer chip, and then it would immediately come back on. In a tenth of a second, it would send our world to the Stone Age. A tenth of a second. Every computer chip on this planet just, and it goes out, and then it comes back on. Of course, every plane flying in the sky would what? Immediately hit the floor. Every car driving would immediately, it's jacked up. All of the stuff that we use technology-wise. Question, are we better off with all this technology? Or has it actually kind of led to more confusion, more difficulty? See, this is, Pope's already seeing cell phones coming. Amazing, right, in 1700. Sole judge of truth and endless error hurled. And then he finally says it. And some seniors have said, this is kind of what we are at the high school. The glory, we're the best. The jest, we're the funny ones. We're the ones, in the end, that's kind of the joke and the riddle of the world. Right? So now you're here. You're a senior. Hurrah. You've made it. To do what? To graduate. To do what? Well, they tell me I'm supposed to go get a job or something like that. I guess I'm supposed to go to education or something like that. Like one of my seniors said, let me get this straight. The thing I hate the most, education. You're telling me I got to do it some more? And then and afterwards, and I say, no, you not only got to do it, now you get to pay for it. Yeah. Whereas before it was all free. Now you get to pay for it. Well, I don't want to do that. Oh, that's cool. What are you going to do then? I don't know, because I got to feed myself, which means you got to have an education so you can get a job. Don't think of school as education. And for those of you that say, seriously heavy stuff, you got it. That's Pope's heavy side. Let's turn to Pope's light side. Turn the page. I'm not going to do a lot with rape of the lock, because I don't have the time. But I'll at least say this. Rape of the lock is Pope's attempt to make fun of the video of his day. Now, do you guys know this cat? A number of years ago, he became very popular, named Weird Al Yankovic. Have you guys ever heard of this cat? See, I start lecturing this, and I start to date myself. This is a guy from the 80s, and what he did on MTV is he looked at really popular videos, and he would remake those videos, only he would make fun of the video. So, for example, Madonna had made a famous video called Like a Virgin, which was very controversial for its day. Madonna's still around in your life, but a different kind of artist now. She had made a video called Like a Virgin. It was a very controversial video, sexual, etc. Weird Al Yankovic makes a similar video, only he calls it Like a Surgeon. Or, for example, Michael Jackson had made a very famous video called Bad. And this was very famous. This guy makes a mock video, and he, and he also will make fun of it. He uses the same tune, but he changes the lyrics, and he makes fun of the song. By that, he mocks the song. Now, let's put it in our notes. I told you, Pope translated the Iliad and the Odyssey. He translated the great poems of Homer. Remember the Troy tale. Stories about great warriors fighting in great battles. Pope makes a mock epic. He makes fun of the epic, and he calls it Rape of the Lock. Okay? A lock of hair. Now, what he's making fun of is 18th century rich people who live a really boring existence. They've got lots of money, and they've got lots of time on their hand, and they got nothing to do with all that time. Pope decides to make fun of that class of people. And the way he does it is by imagining a different kind of epic and a different kind of battle in that epic. Namely, a guy likes a girl and he cuts some of her hair off at a party. And a war ensues, but it's not like the famous epics of long ago. It's a different kind of war. It's a little silly squabble. Let's say it for your notes now. Rape of the Lock is Pope's attempt. I'm going to let you read this on your own, but I'm setting you up to it. Rape of the Lock is Pope's attempt to make fun of the society of his day. Why? Well, he saw that society as empty and stupid. Empty and stupid. To that degree, just like Swift's Gulliver's Travels, which sought to make fun. Remember in Gulliver's Travels, what was the whole point of those disgusting yahoos? Who all they cared about was having sex and getting drunk, right? Some of us will say, oh, our society doesn't seem to have changed very much. Remember, the yahoos, however, they're the disgusting ones that roll around in the mud, right? The horses on that island are the ones that kind of look down and say, really? You call that an existence? What was Swift really saying to his English readers? What was he saying about that time period? Something is wrong with a culture that only cares about sex and violence and entertainment. Something is wrong with that culture. But he doesn't come right out and say it. He writes Gulliver's Travels. Pope will do the same thing in Rape of the Lock, where he will make fun of a culture that is completely empty of any meaning. They got lots of money, but they've got no value. They've got no meaning in their life anymore. And the way he does it is through writing this Rape of the Lock. I wish I had more time. We'd go into this in more detail. But now I want to turn to the last of our text on 666. Let's go there now. The last of our poems that we'll work with in this book on the back end is this very famous poem on 666. Let's go there now. Elegy written in a country churchyard. And I'll be spending now the rest of my comments here for the rest of the hour. On 666, 667. All right? Read with me at the top of 667, and you'll get a sense of why this is an important poem for us. In the 18th century, are you reading it with me? In the 18th century, many writers championed reason, clarity, logic. These values led to the articulate, eloquent couplets of Alexander Pope, as we were just working with. They also led to the major scientific discoveries of Newton, of whom Pope wrote, God said, let Newton be, and there was light. In other words, Newton changed forever the world. These values, remember my whiteboard? The differentiation of the value spheres, I called it. These values may be thought of as belonging to daylight. In contrast, the poems in this grouping are set at twilight or at night. They stress emotion. The not always reasonable reaction to circumstances and mystery. These longings and intuitions of human experience that are not clearly communicable or analyzable. By stressing these nighttime qualities, these poets anticipate the artistic movement called, and that's a huge thing for your notes, Romanticism. There is an argument that Thomas Gray's Elegy written in a country churchyard is the beginning of the age we will call Romanticism. Hello? When you join me in January and we begin Senior English B, the first epoch we will study is called the age of Romanticism. Got me? So we will be looking now at this poem as kind of a bridge poem between the age of the Enlightenment, 1700, and the age of Romanticism, 1800. Now to the poem. It's an interesting poem. First of all, you need to understand that in England, lots and lots of church buildings, cathedrals, and the like, outside right next to them have a graveyard or a church yard. You got me? In other words, when you die, that's where you get buried. Now, our graveyard here in Worland, notice there is no church associated with it. Did you notice that, right? There's no cathedral. But in Europe, when you go to a cathedral, almost always you will find some kind of churchyard where people are buried there. How do you know someone is buried in the ground? They leave what behind them? That tombstone, right? That tombstone where they put their name there and a couple of other things like that. Our young poet goes and sits next to this churchyard and he begins to think about all the people buried under the ground and what kind of lives they must have lived. Then he moves to himself and he realizes it won't be long. See, think about it. Your whole life can be mirrored as your 4 years of high school. Everybody starts as a freshman, but sooner or later you got to leave. Your life is the same way. No matter how young, strong, dynamic you are, sooner or later, you got to leave. Of course, think about it. You already learned this when you were a child and you were at the park and you wanted to stay. You didn't want to go, in the van and leave. And they were teaching you from a very young age, hey, dude, this is the way the world is. Sooner or later, you got to get buried under the ground. That's coming. And this kid realizes that, and he asks a really intriguing question at the end of this poem. I wonder what they will write on my tombstone. And then he says, you know what I think I'll do? I'll create the words I want on my own tombstone. I'll put them there. And he does it at the end of this poem. This is what I hope they say about me. It's an intriguing 3B question. If at the end of this weekend, for whatever tragic reason, you're gone, what will those closest to you say about you on your tombstone? What will they say about you? What will they write about you? What will they talk about you? Obviously, you haven't lived very long. The poet in our poem here hasn't lived very long either. He's young. Take a look. The curfew, I'm reading on 667. The curfew tolls the bell of parting day. The loving herd winds slowly o'er the lea. The plowman homeward plods his weary way and leaves the world of darkness unto me. It's the end of the day. And the guy who's been taking care of his cattle is coming home. He leads them every day to the pasture, every day back. Now fades the glimmering landscape on the side, and all the air a solemn stillness holds, save where the beetle wheels his droning flight, and drowsy tinklings lull the distant folds. He hears sheep far away. He hears a couple of beetles. He's sitting in the grass right next to this cemetery graveyard. Save that from yonder ivy-mantled tower, the moping owl does to the moon complain of such wandering near her secret bower, molest her ancient solitary reign. Now, I'm seeing some of you not reading these words with me. Trust me, I got a number of questions coming on the exam of these words. You'll learn much better if you read the words with me while I read. Pay attention. Try and read through the words. Try and read them and understand while I'm working with you as well. Notice he says that the owl is sitting up in the church tower, right? Of course, we know what owls do at night. They hunt, right? They hunt. Look at the next one. Beneath those rugged elms, that yew tree shade where heaves the turf in many a moldering heap. What does he mean, the heaps? Where are we? We're his graveyard, right? So he's like looking under the trees. There they are, right? Each in his, this is interesting, each in his narrow cell forever laid, the rude forefathers of the hamlet sleep. Doesn't matter how much money you make and how big a house you buy. In the end, the house you get to live in for the rest of your eternity is 6 by 6, as they say. Right? A narrow cell. Top of page 668. The breezy call of incense-breathing morn, the swallow twittering from the straw-built shed, the cockshrill clarion of the echoing horn, no more shall rouse them from their lonely bed. Once you're dead, nobody brings you back to life, in other words. For them no more the blazing hearts shall burn. They're never going to be at home again. Or busy housewife ply her evening care. No children run to lisp their sire's return to climb his knees and the envied kiss to share. In other words, daddy's coming home and all the children run out. Not anymore because he's buried under the ground. Oft did the harvest to their sickle yield their furrow off the stubborn glib who's broke. Now jocund did they drive their team afield. How bowed the woods beneath their sturdy stroke. All of the working men who went out, right, to take care of their herds. Not anymore. Let not ambition mock their useful toil, their homely joys and destiny obscure, nor grandeur hear with a disdainful smile the short and simple annals of the poor. And all of a sudden this kid, it hits them. Most of the people buried in this churchyard, rich or poor, they're really poor. They're people who didn't have a lot. They worked hard and then they died. And to that degree, now they're already forgotten. But he's going to ask some interesting questions about these poor people. The boast of heraldry, the pomp of power, all that beauty, all that wealth e'er gave, awaits alike the inevitable hour. The paths of glory lead but to the grave. It does not matter whether you're incredibly rich and powerful or you're really poor and forgotten. Sooner or later, everybody goes to the same plot of land. Everybody goes to the earth. Everybody dies. By the way, you can put a 3A observation. It sounds a lot like Whitman, doesn't it? Who will write, remember, in 1855, Leaves of Grass. A very similar kind of observation. Keep reading. Nor you, ye proud, impute to these the fault of memory or their tomb no trophies raise, where through the long-drawn aisle and fettered vault the pealing anthem swells the note of praise. In other words, just because they didn't have a lot to say about themselves on their tombstone doesn't mean that their life was completely wasted. Look at the next one. I'm going to work right up till the bell rings, so don't put your stuff away. Trust me, you want to stay with me because whatever I don't cover, you're going to have to cover on your own for the exam. Can storied urn or animated bust back to its mansion call the fleeting breath? Can honor's voice provoke the silent dust, or flattery soothe the dull cold ear of death? In other words, it doesn't matter how big a mausoleum you build for yourself. When you die, it's not like you're going to be there to enjoy it. Perhaps in this neglected spot is laid some heart once pregnant with celestial fire, hands that the rod of empire might have swayed, or wake to ecstasy the living lyre. It's possible somebody buried in this churchyard could have been an amazingly great person, led kingdoms, just born in the wrong place at the wrong time. But knowledge to their eyes her ample page, rich with the spoils of time, did e'er unroll. Chill penury repressed their noble rage, and froze the genial currents of the soul. Full many a gem of purest ray serene, the dark unfathomed caves of ocean bare. Full many a flowers born to blush unseen, and wasted sweetness on the desert air. Small village Hamden, that with dauntless breath the little tyrant of his fields withstood. Some mute inglorious Milton here may rest, some Cromwell guiltless of his country's blood. There could have been people who would have been really famous, like a Shakespeare, but they were born in the wrong place at the wrong time. So now they're buried in this little churchyard. The applause of listening senates to command, the threats of pain or ruin, and ruin to despise, to scatter plenty or a smiling land, and read their history in a nation's eyes. Their lot forbade, because they were poor. Nor circumcised alone their growing virtues, but their crimes confined forbade to wade through slaughter to a throne, and shut the gates of mercy on mankind. The struggling pangs of conscious truth to hide, to quench the blushes of ingenious shame, or heap the shrine of luxury and pride with incense kindled at the muse's flame. Far from the madding crowd ignoble strife, their sober wishes never learned to stray. Along the cool, sequestered vale of life, they kept the noiseless tenor of their way. They weren't populars, and they could have cared less about being rich and popular and famous. All they cared about was living a quiet life. Is it better to be really famous, or is it better to live in a small town and just be quiet and live a quiet life? Yet even these bones from insult to protect, some frail memorials still erected nigh, with uncouth rhymes and shapeless sculpture decked, implores the passing tribute of a sigh. Their name, their years, spelt by the unlettered muse, the place of fame and elegy supply, and many a holy text around she strews that teach the rustic moralist to die. An elegy is a poem about the dead. For who, to dumb forgetfulness a prey, this pleasing anxiousness being ere resigned, left the warm precincts of the cheerful day, nor cast one longing, lingering look behind. On some fond breast the parting soul relies, some pious droops the closing eye requires. Even from the tomb the voice of nature cries, even in our ashes lift their wonted fires. For thee, who mindful of the unhonored dead, dost in these lines their artless tale relate, if chance by lonely contemplation led, some kindred spirit shall endure thy fate. You could be right now reading this at a high school, for example, in Cherry Creek. And you could have been born into another family. And you could have been had a whole different economic future. You didn't choose any of it, he says. Happily, some hoary-headed swain may say, oft have we seen him, talking about him, the poet, seen him at the peep of dawn, brushing with hasty steps the dews away to meet the sun upon the upland lawn. There at the foot of yonder nodding breach that wreathes its old fantastic roots so high as listless length at noontide would he stretch and pour upon the brook that babbles by. In other words, some guy leads his cows out and might say, hey, every day I used to see this young kid sitting over there writing in his little book. He's gone. It's, of course, the poet Thomas Gray, right? He realizes someday I'll be gone. And that guy will say, hey, we used to know that kid. Keep reading. Hard by yon wood, now smiling as in scorn, muttering his wayward fancies he would rove, now drooping woeful wane, like one forlorn or crazed with care, crossed in hopeless love. One morn I missed him on the customed hill, along the heath, near his favorite tree. Another came, nor yet beside the rill, nor up the lawn, nor at the wood was he. The next with dirges dew and sad array, slow through the church way path, we saw him borne. In other words, won't it be weird, he says, to see me carried to the graveyard where the epitaph will be written about him. I hope you can remember me, he says. Thanks, guys. Enjoy.